Hey there, and welcome to the Sudo Show, brought to you by the Destination Linux Network. On this episode, we'll share our very first live Ask Me Anything event. We had folks from all over join us via video conference to ask us questions about tech and careers. All that and more on this episode of the Sudo Show. Welcome to the Sudo Show, your home for all things enterprise open source. I'm your host, Eric the IT Guy, and Brandon will be joining me in just a moment. Last week, we hosted our first ever live AMA, Ask Me Anything episode, and it was a great chance to sit down live with all of you and discuss your questions and thoughts. Today, we wanted to share the highlights of that 2-hour event with you. Couldn't make it? Wasn't sure what to expect? Not to worry, Brandon and I plan on hosting a live episode about once every quarter, so next time you can jump in, hang out with us, and even become part of the content. Before we dive into the AMA, though, I have to show some love to our sponsor, Bitwarden. Bitwarden is the easiest and safest way for individuals, teams, and businesses to store, share, and sync sensitive data. You can go to bitwarden.com/DLN to check out this amazing service. Every day, websites and apps are under attack by bots and nefarious individuals trying to gain access to personal information, financial records, and even social media. That is why security experts recommend a unique, randomly generated password for every account to which you have access. For many people, like myself, that could be a couple hundred accounts. There's no way to remember that many unique strings. That is why the Destination Linux Network turns to a password manager we can trust. With Bitwarden, you can create these randomly generated passwords, tag and sort them, and ensure they are different from every site you visit. The best part is Bitwarden will manage all of this for you, so you don't have to. If you want to make the smart move, like many of our awesome community already have, then check out bitwarden.com/DLN and get started for free. If you're like me, though, you'll want to show your appreciation by signing up for the Premium Edition, especially when the Premium Edition starts at only $10 a year. That's right, $10 per year. So thank you to Bitwarden for sponsoring the Sudo Show and the entire Destination Linux Network. Now, without further ado, here's our very first Ask Me Anything episode. See you all on the other side.
All right, guys. So thank you everyone for joining. I really appreciate it. So, we can hit with all the folks on online first and we get into the written AMA.
Yeah, I'm good with that. Although we did start a bit of a conversation about monitor setups, and mine's a very simple setup. I have dual 22-inch monitors that sit on monitor arms on my desk. Although Brandon's setup is much more interesting, and I think I might steal it.
I have two ultra wides. One is the Lenovo ThinkVision P44W, and this it's essentially the equivalent of two 1080p 24-inch monitors side by side. And then above it, I have a Dell 34-inch ultra wide, which is basically the equivalent of two 19-inch monitors side by side. And that one essentially is my email and chat. And then below on the P44 is the where I get all my real work done.
When my main device was a laptop, I'd have it hooked into a dock, but I'd have that monitor open, so it'd be a third monitor underneath my two floating 22s. Mm-hmm. And I actually use that as a communications screen only. It was email, it was chat, and then that way I could see what was going on without interfering with the kind of my main workflow across the front.
Should also mention this one. So I keep the laptop in clamshell mode on the dock. So I have an X1 6th gen with the mechanical dock, and I do have another display. It's a 14-inch that I do bring in occasionally when I need a little more real estate. Just typically, stays in that mode. I don't have other displays for like vertical. Like occasionally, I wouldn't mind having a vertical display, especially if I'm looking at hundreds of lines of code.
Yeah, that was actually one of the follow-up questions was vertical monitors, and I've never used one. I could see a time when I was doing sysadmin work on a daily basis where that could have come in handy. But see, that was submitted by Toad Rocks Boat. He sent that in ahead of time on our Discourse channel. So next question just popped up via Twitter, actually. Brandon, you want to give folks a quick update on where we're looking timeline-wise for that missed I/O video?
Oh, boy.
I know. I threw you under the bus. I couldn't help it.
I've been so busy. That's coming. I have not had time to edit it. It's done. I just haven't edited the video. It's coming.
Yeah, between that power outage, getting ready for today, and as well,
I've been
regular work things. It's been a little crazy for both of us the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's been insane.
We do have quite a few pre-submitted questions, but I want to give preference to the folks in the room. So if anybody wants to unmute, ask a question, let's dive into this.
I'm a production IT guy running his own production company. I've been helping with funeral homes and different other nonprofit. We've been trying to do webcasting, and they've been thinking Zoom, but every time I have to use their equipment, and every time, since I'm running this company as open source, should I just bite the gun and update all my equipment on the camera side and get something that would work with my setup?
I haven't done a lot with web conferencing these days. I'm more on the back end, but the way I've seen this get handled in larger organizations, like in meeting rooms, is essentially building out using the certified hardware from that Zoom certifies, or Microsoft Teams, Blue Jeans, whoever it is. That seems to have the best results. The hardware itself is not exactly affordable, but it's the path of least resistance. Now, that being said, I've been working from home forever and coming up with the best ways of being able to handle like those video conferencing. Like I have another cameras that are certified, or not, maybe not necessarily certified, but like I have a $1,000 Logitech webcam that I've put in my living room that's next to my office. So when I need to do like a big presentation where I want people to see my hand gestures and things like that, I move into that space. And
so something you might think about doing is, I know OBS has plugins where you can use your own monitor or a video capture device that's plugged into your computer, and from there you can actually redirect the output into an application like Zoom or something. It's something I've been considering doing for my own work-based presentations, because it'd be nice to have kind of a picture-in-picture view with where I control what the picture looks like. Because between Google Meet and Zoom and Ring Central and all these other tools that are out there, Blue Jeans, what's the other one, Big Blue Button or something, between all of those different platforms, your experience is different. Something I'm considering doing is redirecting my video output from my Logitech webcam through OBS. That way I can do the overlays the way I want them to look. So if I'm giving a presentation, I don't have to worry about how that's coming across. I can just run it through OBS. I can have my scenes pre-created, and then I can use that as either the source for the stream or for the video recording. So OBS, I'd have to look up what the plugin's called. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but that would be a good option.
What video capture cards works with Linux? I've been using Elgato for the last 3 months, and it's not working with my Linux setup.
I think this would be a good opportunity to plug someone who could answer these questions in his sleep, and I think that's almost literal. But on Tuesday nights, if you haven't heard, on Tuesday nights there is the Ask Noah show, and it's hosted by Noah Chalaya. It's on Tuesdays at 6 p.m. You can call in, ask him questions, and this is right up Noah's alley.
Yeah, Noah knows the video capture stuff. He's probably the best I know in that space.
Okay. Yep, and I know he'd be more than happy to take your questions, and could answer that a whole lot easier than Brandon or I could. Here's one Brandon and I definitely wanted to make sure that we covered. We were asked a few times, how do you transition from either an entry-level position like help desk to the next level up, whether that's systems administrator, security engineer? So Brandon, if you want to take the first swing at that one.
Well, I got lucky with my first entry-level job. I was brought on to be a Linux desktop subject matter expert, because the company I started at 15 years ago was migrating from Windows to Linux desktops. The entire organization. They weren't like a small 20, 30, 50 person company. We're talking 5,000 employees plus at the time. They were $2 billion in revenue at that time, and they were in the process of migrating off Windows 2000 and Windows XP to Linux. So I got lucky there, but going out of that niche of being a Linux desktop expert, or, I moved into other roles, but, breaking out of that was basically, I was a Linux expert, not a help desk guy, right? I got lucky. That's not everyone, but like right out, like a lot of people I know that right out of college go to, can usually land like a decent entry level system administration job instead of a help desk job, or a solution architecture, sales engineer job, if that's the route they want to go. Kind of breaking out of the desktop space is really tough if you're a Linux, if you want to get into Linux. But my suggestion would be getting more into in that help desk niche, is breaking into the Windows side first, because that's the perception that and once you get into that, you can break into the other spaces. I know, Eric, you have a story like that.
So I've answered this question enough times that I actually gave a talk about it last year itself. It was getting started with open source. So with my background, I've been a technologist as long as I can remember. I've always wanted to work in technology, and so when I got started, it was kind of the same thing. I started out as an intern. I started out with desktop support. That took a few years. That took 2 or 3 years, and eventually I was able to work at a company that I was a bit of a hybrid. I was working desktop support, but also some basic server support. And at that time, it was Active Directory and creating users, setting up email boxes in Exchange, that kind of thing. One of the advantages I had was I tinkered with Linux on the side and was able to... Unfortunately, at that point in your career, there's a little bit of fake it until you make it. So I kind of had to pretend like I knew a little bit more than I did. So I came across a company that needed a full-time Linux systems administrator, and at least here in Kansas City in 2011-ish, there was a bit of a shortage for Linux systems administrators. So I was able to prove that yes, I've been a server administrator and I know a little bit about this Linux thing. One of the advantages that all of you in this room have over 2011 version of Eric was you all are doing things to further your career, doing things to further the cause of Linux more than I was. I actually came across the open source community after I spent years as a Linux systems administrator. So the fact that you're here, the fact that you're learning, the fact that you're participating in a community is a huge help. And so when I actually had this conversation offline with a couple of folks just last week, and one of the pieces of advice that I gave was put that on your resume. Include the fact that you're involved in the community, include the fact that you tinker in a home lab, and just show that you have that drive, show that you have a desire to learn. And in a lot of cases, when you're trying to get that entry-level systems administrator role, a lot of times that's enough.
Showing the drive. That's what landed my first job.
And to be honest, a lot of managers, a lot of team leads would rather you come in with a good drive, with a desire to learn, and not know as much, because then they don't have to unteach, quote, bad habits. They don't have to retrain you to do certain things the way that company does them. But you come in with a desire to learn and a good foundation, and they can build on that a whole lot easier than retraining someone who's more senior.
My second job was actually how I landed that was it actually needed a ton of MySQL experience, and I had none. But I had tons of Linux experience, and I actually was told I got hired because I was honest of the fact that I didn't know anything about MySQL, and the guy I was competing against for that job just came up and lied, and obviously had no idea of what MySQL, how to even write a SQL query. And so it's like, I'd rather teach you than what you need to know and the fact that you said, I don't know, was impressive in the interview. I mean, like, no, it's okay to say I don't know. It really is. It's better to say I don't know than fake it and then bomb the job interview. You'll be thrown out faster than you were let in.
It's a fine line, but there's a difference between kind of faking it until you making it and just straight up lying.
Yep. I'm just looking at kind of a follow-up. One of the questions we got on Discourse was, if I could go for a Linux certification, where would I start? What cert would I begin with? Does certification matter at all? From a Linux certification perspective, I still think the Red Hat certifications hold water still. They are practical exams. They're not multiple choice exams like other certifications. If you can't do the work, you're not going to pass the test. I'm on my way to my RHCA, which is the Red Hat Certified Architect, which is the highest you can go. There are multiple layers on top. You can get, I think it's now RHCA level 20. Those are probably less important for the entry at an entry level. The RHCSA is awesome. And the new RHCE, you're basically certifying that you're an that you know how to do automation, because it's not so much around RHEL as it is around Ansible. Now, outside of that, there's the Linux Foundation ones and also SUSE's certifications. SUSE certifications, I had a SUSE Certified Linux Administrator at one point. It was a lot like the RHEL certifications. So those are, I think, very valid, especially if you're going into a shop that is a SUSE shop.
I mean, we really don't have to justify this, but I feel like it's worth noting that, we're not pitching Red Hat certifications because we work for Red Hat. I mean, myself, I came to work at Red Hat because of the experience that I had as a customer of the company over my career. One of the reasons why kind of the next step of my personal journey was once I got my first server administrator role. I was a hybrid between Windows and Linux. I ended up making a decision a few years into that stage of my career to go strictly Linux. And I literally went through a phase where I had a Microsoft certified server administrator book, or whatever their tests were called back then. And then in the other hand, I had the RHCSA study guide. And I kind of compared the two. What do I want to do with my career? And the fact that Red Hat, for as long as I've known, Red Hat has offered practical exams. And it's kind of back to that hiring manager's perspective of, do I want somebody who's book smart? Do I want somebody who can regurgitate all these definitions to me? Or do I trust someone who's actually gone in under testing conditions and created a user, expanded a disk, actually done the work? Because I've met people with 3 or 4 certifications, and you ask them to go and fix an issue on a server, and they go,
Mm-hmm.
But when you go with someone with a practical certification like the RHCSA, you know a little bit better of what you're getting.
Yeah.
That's not to say that having book knowledge isn't critical, especially, I mean, think about Kubernetes. There's how many different types of Kubernetes certifications these days? Mm-hmm. But there's also a huge demand and a huge shortage for people who understand how Kubernetes works. So having a Kubernetes type certification would still be valid.
Yeah, indeed. There's another question in here that Computer Kid is here on the Zoom meeting. Wanted to call his question specifically because I started in technology about his age. I was actually 12, and he says he's almost 14, and building the skills that at home on just spare desktop machine. That's fantastic. How to get high, I don't know if the question is like how to get hired, but like when I was younger, it was easier because we had all these tiny ISPs, right? We had like just here in my hometown, we had like 20 ISPs that you could get dial-up service from. If you had an interest in computers when I was that age, I just went in and just like, hey, what can I do to help? And they're like, yeah, we'll give you like $5 an hour to run cable or stuff like that, right? Back then it was a little easier to break in as a teenager. And then, where to spend all the time now though. So as you do get your hands dirty. So when you do go in and go for a job when you're going into college and get a tech job, like right now it's Kubernetes and automation languages, whether that's Ansible. I mean, of course I'm going to plug Ansible.
If you want a non-Red Hat solution, I'm a big fan of SaltStack as well.
Yeah, I was going to mention Salt there. And then Chef. Actually, I am a big fan of Chef. I think Chef is awesome.
Chef has been doing some amazing things lately.
And container technology is not going away anytime soon, and neither is virtualization. If you have an opportunity to really tinker with proprietary or open source virtualization technology, do it.
if you want to gain some practical experience while you're finishing up school, do something like and find a project who needs help in the space that you're wanting to work in. Get some real experience, and then that is something huge you can put on a resume, and a hiring manager is going to look at that and go, "Wow, you have the education, but you've been doing this for X number of years already.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I want someone like you on my team." In the chat, Corey asks, would CentOS be okay to use to learn the Red Hat exam? So I've got a twofold answer for you. The first is yes, sort of. Pretty much anything on the RHCSA should be okay to do on CentOS, but I do have a solution that's one step better. And if you go out to redhat.com and find or better yet, just search for Red Hat developer license, you can actually get copies of CentOS, of Ansible Tower, Satellite.
I mean, RHEL.
You can get a certain number of licenses for, and RHEL, obviously, so you can install the actual ISOs, get an actual subscription, and work on RHEL proper.
Hey, it's free. And you need a Red Hat account, but other than that, it's free for development and learning purposes.
I could go if you like. So I want to make software freedom a full-time job. I'm passionate about software engineering and system administration, but I don't have certifications. I was wondering, in your opinions, what are the best companies for doing that the most, starting up, and what is the best approach to that?
So when you say software freedom is a full-time job, are you saying you want to work in open source, or are you more interested on, say, the legal side?
More so in development. I respect that, there's only so far making everything free, making everything open source can get you in terms of allowing you to eat, let's say. I'm thinking that path is really going to be, you're going to have your job, which hopefully, preferably, dream world is going to be something where you're producing software everybody gets to use. Maybe there's an enterprise version, but it follows the principles of software freedom. And then you have your outside of work time, and then you can work on completely free projects. So I figure that path is going to look like working for a company like Ubuntu or GitLab or Red Hat. I know the players, generally speaking, in the FOSS world, but I don't know quite, where is the best places to go for seeking a career, a full-time job in that respect.
I've always suggested building your portfolio. I think that's really important, like whether if you have a GitHub or GitLab, like through contributions. Like it's not a guarantee. And I actually think it's not as important as it used. It's becoming more important more recently. I've seen more people get hired simply because of their GitHub profile. Like they have tons of projects that they've done pull requests against or merge requests in GitLab, and they're actually participating in a specific community. But participating in a community like that is sponsored by a large entity, whether that be Red Hat, Canonical, or SUSE, is not sadly, it's still not a guarantee, but it does get you visibility and increases your chances of landing a development position at a open source focused organization.
Do you have any recommended certifications or avenues to pursue in that respect, education and so on?
From a development standpoint, it may not necessarily be a certification, but the language of the cloud has been trending towards Go. Kubernetes is written in Go. The vast majority of the surrounding ecosystem is written in Go. But a few years ago, it was Python. Ansible was written in Python, and before that, a lot of tools were written in Ruby. So it keeps changing and evolving. So there's not one technology to really land on. Tomorrow it could be Rust, or it could be C for web. So,
oh gosh,
we have a kind of a follow-up question. Do we have a good example of a GitHub profile? I do have one. It's not mine. Mine is terrible, to be perfectly frank. I'll put a link to one in the show notes. I like this one because it really just shows, okay, this is how many stars I have on my projects. These are the amount of commits. And I think you can view the code for his README so you can get an idea. And like most used languages, so it tells a prospective employer that goes and looks at your profile what languages you actually write in. So that's how we built his profile.
Okay, so here's a couple of questions that I know Brandon has been itching to cover, so I'll go ahead and read this off for you. But G, over in Discourse, actually posted a question about where do you purchase servers and hardware for your home lab?
Yeah, so I don't buy like Dell Supermicro Direct for my stuff. All I care about right away is, does it have IPMI? And these days, can I just use an AMD with an AM4 socket? I'm actually rebuilding my lab right now, and ASRock actually makes a board that has IPMI, and even better, has an AM4 socket, so I can use any Ryzen CPU I want. And it has PCI 4, so I can do some fun things with that, like with whether if that's graphics or just putting in like a 25 gig networking. That's part of the plan anyway. But I kind of build my own because even with buying secondhand like Dell or Supermicro hardware, it's still expensive. Not expensive as in like the initial cost. It's expensive to run. I don't want to run an enterprise class server in my lab just simply because of the power and cooling requirements. Like if I can get away with doing passive cooling, I do it because I don't want the noise. But right now everything is active cooled. So I just hop on Newegg and find boards that support that stuff. And I just keep watching that. I mean, Newegg and Amazon and Tiger Direct is really where I get all my stuff. And it's all pretty much just custom builds. I don't buy anything off the shelf.
So in the past, I've used a company called ServerMonkey. ServerMonkey, the server store out of Texas in the United States. They're the ones that go in when companies that do buy direct from Dell or HP, when all of those go off lease and they're 3 or 4 years old, companies like ServerMonkey are the ones that buy up that hardware and refurb and resell. So I've bought a few Dell servers off of ServerMonkey, mostly because the name's hilarious. But I had a good experience with ServerMonkey. If you want like production quality hardware that's a few years old in good shape, but is similar to what you'd see in the data center itself. So DR posted in the chat that his home server is basically an old workstation, i7, 32 gigs of RAM. That literally was how I started my home lab. I built a desktop, and so I just bought double of everything with the exception of the graphics card. And so one was a headless server that I installed CentOS 6 on, and the other ended up becoming my workstation. It was a custom build, and that server worked great for me for years. Production stuff ran in containers on the host OS, and then anything I was playing with ran in VMs. So I mean, it's a great way, and you spend less than $1,000, and you've got a really decent server to run, like DR suggested, Plex and Nextcloud and Minecraft and things like that. So that's a perfect place to start. Corey posted in chat if he wanted to make a production studio at home, if we'd suggest egg cartons. That's a really, really easy, cheap solution. Not as cheap, but fairly decent, is like what I've got here. I've got foam panels that I bought off of Amazon, and I just mounted those to the wall using command strips. So the question that we actually got in chat a day or so ago was, how well does Linux perform on a tablet?
GNOME is shockingly running great. Sometimes it's can be a hog CPU wise, mostly, not necessarily memory wise. But yeah, I've been using them to great success. The ThinkPads I kind of use them as hard phones essentially, because I run basically all my meetings off of those tablets, especially the ThinkPad 10. I wish the on-screen keyboard was a little better, but I do have external keyboards for them. So actually on the Pine phone, I'm running Mobian, which is a Debian-based distribution, which is using Phosh. And what I'm really liking about it is actually the up-to-date keyboard. And if that can get into upstream GNOME, that would be fantastic, because the keyboard, at least on Mobian, is fantastic.
Okay, so here's a couple more workflow type questions. When you're using Git, we talked about GitHub and GitLab a little bit. So when you're using Git, do you prefer CLI or the GUI?
Oh, okay. So it depends. So my preferred editor is Visual Studio Code. In Visual Studio Code, I'll use the built-in Git capability in the UI. It's there, I'll just use it. Just makes it easier. But I do still do a lot of stuff like on the command line. I actually do prefer Git on the command line.
Yeah, and I kind of go back and forth on that one myself. When I was at GitLab, I pretty much exclusively used Git through the GitLab UI. Through the web interface, just because all of my work was there, so it was easy just to make code changes in the online editor and submitting that way. When I'm writing a bunch of Ansible playbooks, I'm usually using VS Code because I can have my editor, I can have a command line down at the bottom. So a lot of times I'll just do my Git commits there. But if I'm server side, if I'm working on a headless system, then I'd probably default to the CLI just because it's quick and convenient. The follow-up to that question was, do you have one that you prefer or recommend? Use what works for you. But my recommendation would be, if you're new to Git, use the command line so you can learn the process. See what the different commands are, see how it interacts, how your Git repo takes on information and displays information, because then when you go to a GUI, a lot of that is abstracted behind the UI. If something were to go wrong and you've never used the command line, it's going to be a lot harder to troubleshoot than if you realize, oh, it just broke down here. Maybe it's a bug in the Git plugin or something of VS Code. So you knew that, oh, hey, it broke at this step. So I can just go to the command line, run these two commands, and I'm back up and running.
I'll just read this off from Vegas Josh from our Matrix room. I know from the show that you love all things open source for the enterprise, but what Linux and FOSS stuff do you geek out personally in everyday life? Is there any tech or software that you're really into that doesn't necessarily tie to enterprise? Home Assistant is probably what I've been most interested in at home, tinkering with that, like in terms of like I'm using that as essentially a barrier between all my devices in my house that it supports, that I don't communicate to the internet. I'm very, very adamant. I don't want a light switch to be on the public internet. So I have Home Assistant is essentially acting as that barrier. And then I have Home Assistant talking to things like HomeKit, like Apple HomeKit, so I can do all the stuff on my iPhone.
So Toad, who's still with us, actually asked in Discord, so Brandon, do you have a bus factor plan for your personal digital assets? So does your wife have access to your password vault? Does she know what to do with all those servers should you get hit by the proverbial bus? What's that plan look like for you?
Well, if that does happen, what will immediately happen is my wife will, after a couple of weeks of grieving, will probably just rip out all my servers and throw them in the trash can. Because she'll be like, I don't know what the heck this is doing, and make it go away. But from a password perspective, all seriousness, we use Bitwarden for password management. With the family plan, if anything would have happened to me or her, we have access to each other's passwords. All of them. We have if she needs to get into my email, she can get into my email. I have now 3 email accounts that get used, but like the one that actually matters, she has access to that. And well, she has access to the other 2 as well. But the one so she can get into our bank accounts, reset any passwords if needed or whatever. She has complete access to everything. And in terms of like documents and things like that, I have a setup where all my data is backed up. I take the time to do this about once a month, and all the data that is relevant for our house, for anything, any life documents. I have a hard disk that I keep in a safety deposit box. And if anything were to happen to me and she, for whatever reason, can't get access to the data through the cloud services that we're using, all that data is in a safety deposit box on a hard drive. And it's not, it's not a lot of data, but but I make sure that it's done regularly.
And about $10 in our discourse asked, how would you migrate a business or school to open source? And I think that's a great question.
On the back end services, quite frankly, are probably the easiest to migrate to open source software. Like if you're starting from scratch, obviously just do it. But like migrating like enterprise resource management platforms, ERP, moving that to an open source platform is easy. CRM, moving the data is hard, but implementing them is easy, and getting people to adopt them is not forklift. Because it's all web-based, regardless of platform. Now, moving your end users to open source, that's where things get really hard. Everyone's using Microsoft Office or Google Docs on Windows or on Mac. But the way we did this, my first job 15 years ago, was on every Windows machine we pushed out. At the time, it was OpenOffice 1.0. So thankfully, that's not much of a problem. I mean, LibreOffice 7 has awesome support for Microsoft Office formats. Today, it's a lot easier to move off of Microsoft Office to LibreOffice. There's more than one way to approach it, but moving an organization, small business, medium business, a school to open source is not for the faint of heart, especially if you're looking at end user computing.
And my answer would be very similar. Do the back-end stuff that your end users aren't going to see, and then start switching over your desktop applications. Because, I mean, desktop Linux has come so far in the past 3 or 4 years that when you factor in how easy it is to use GNOME, or how much you can customize either GNOME or Plasma to look like Windows or to behave like Windows. If someone's already used to using LibreOffice and Firefox, and you change their desktop, the way it looks, or change the way that the quote start menu behaves, it's going to be a whole lot easier, because you don't want to start a riot with your end users by switching everything overnight.
Mm-hmm.
Our first live AMA was an amazing success. We had plenty of questions and got to hear some of your amazing stories. Live, we discussed Brandon's tablet addiction and deep love of coffee. We talked about how embarrassing it was for me to get hired by Red Hat, only to find that my RHCSA was actually expired. Then, in the post-show, Brandon teaches an impromptu lesson on network-based storage. In fact, our 2-hour event went for almost 3. If you want to catch all the jokes, outtakes, extra questions, and more of our live AMA event, head on over to the Destination Linux Network YouTube channel for the full, uncut version. And as always, if you'd like to catch more of our content, you can find it over at sudo.show and on social media at sudoshow podcast. You can catch more awesome content over at our network partners, destinationlinux.network. You can follow me at itguyeric or on itguyeric.com, and you can catch my buddy Brandon on social media at dbrandonjohnson or on his website at open-tech.net. Remember, the Sudo Show is your place for all things enterprise open source. Until next time.